meeting. And it's great to have you all join us for this week's meeting. We have two presentations today in our hour together. So first, we'll have Mike Phillips, the CEO of Vigilant, talk about his business. And then we have Roman Selichenko, the CEO of Labelless, talk about his company. And yeah, before we get started, I wanted to see if anyone had any updates to share with the group. And folks, if you want us to hear, you have to unmute yourself. All right, doesn't seem like anyone has any news to share. So in that case, I will turn it right over to Mike. Mike, are you there?
Me. Sorry, trying to get unmuted.
There you are,
Mike. Second here.
Hey, Mike, great to have you.
Good. Yeah, great to be here.
So I've heard of Vigilant a few years ago already, and I think you guys were part of the Lexus Accelerator.
No, we didn't. Yeah, no, we didn't do that.
Okay, so I might be confused.
We did actually. You might remember us from presenting here.
No, I know, but at the time, it seemed that the focus was more on using data to enable attorneys in jury selection to make decisions in real time. As far as I remember, it seems like you pivoted a little bit since then. Is that correct?
It might be. You know, there was another company that was VIGJI.
Okay. All right. Well, so I'm confused.
Yeah, but I mean, it's similar notion, right? So I'll talk a bit about kind of what we do high level, which is not unaligned with that, although we've never worked in a specific space, and then talk a bit about kind of where our products are at right now.
Sounds great. I'll just turn it over to you.
Cool. So let me.
Great to have you, Mike. Okay, you can share your screen if you have a presentation.
Cool. Can folks see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
Amazing. Cool. Well, thanks for having me here. So I'll talk a bit about high level about what we do with Vigilant, and then walk through the products, and then it sounds like we'll have time for some questions. We'd love to answer anything that folks have. So kind of 10,000 foot view, we build tools for transparency. We're really focused on taking information that's nominally public data and making that accessible and usable for folks. When you think about what that looks like, as a product, if you're inside the building, transparency is a really powerful tool to reduce risk. It's a way, sort of like a radar for risk, and a way to see what potential problems or challenges are out there for you. And if you're on the outside of the building, it's a powerful lever for accountability and for change. And so, we work with a pretty diverse set of customers, ranging from like large financial institutions to political campaigns to media organizations, kind of across the board. Like that sort of key element is leveraging public data for insight, for information, for intelligence to help either reduce risk or enhance transparency. Sorry, my thing isn't moving. Sorry, my slides are like very slow. So the amount of public data, the amount of information that's out there is growing really rapidly, and largely the tools aren't changing comparable to that. The amount of public data sites just on data.gov, which is like a very small universe of the world of the data that's available, has grown several orders of magnitude. And that's information that's available about companies, about people, about businesses. That's really detailed and complex. All sorts of different data sets that were previously not available online or previously not even collected by governments are suddenly available as public and as open data. But it's really difficult to access and make use of all of that information in a meaningful way. And so that's largely where we come in. We think there's a lot of new risks in all of this information that's available, because all of a sudden, say you're a large institution, it's easy for somebody that's doing some sort of accountability research on you to find this information. So not knowing about it first poses a real reputational risk, but it also is an opportunity in different ways for different business processes, for helping to manage regulatory risk, and for folks that are doing that kind of accountability work as well. Net, we think transparency makes the world a much better place. The regulatory and reputational risks are also growing as just regulators get more and more involved. A lot of the things that we deal with specifically are around risks like pay-to-play or outside business activities, things like that, essentially conflicts of interest that aren't properly managed or disclosed. And in these cases, public data offers really invaluable insight, but it's often generally inaccessible. So it sits in balkanized or siloed data sets, really difficult interfaces and difficulty of discovery or knowing that information even exists at all, as well as workflows that just really don't make any sense. We talk to a lot of customers whose process is basically going out and searching the same database over and over and over again, which is obviously a crazy thing to be doing. So we build tools for transparency and aim to solve these problems in really different ways than legacy data providers have. I think the main thing that's really different is about how our sort of whole operation is structured. So we and really even just how we think of ourselves. So rather than thinking of ourselves as a data provider, as selling people our data or anything like that, we think of ourselves as a data access layer, right? Really sitting between public data sources themselves and the user that needs to access them, and providing that layer of access between sources, and as a result, maintaining a really high degree of direct verifiability to the source, and also high degree of clarity of provenance for any of the data that's in our system. That also lets us have really highly current or near real-time data, because that system is sort of naturally modular, it makes it very easy for us to extend it. So when we work with customers that say this is great, but we need also, it'd be great if we could also be monitoring this universe of data or something like that, it's very easy for us to plug in those additional data sources. Some of this might seem a bit abstract, but I'll show you the product, and I think some of those will make a bit more sense. So getting into the product now. So we're a public data access platform. What that means is that we sit as this essentially layer between thousands of different government records databases that are accessible and available now, and users that need to use them for research functions. So whether it's monitoring for new records or running queries across thousands of different databases, those are the sort of functions that folks would use our tools for. In particular, sort of our core use cases are monitoring solutions to help financial services avoid costly risks. So there we principally work around pay-to-play issues. In that space, we're sort of the leading provider for pay-to-play monitoring solutions, meaning we monitor for political contributions across all 50 states, a few hundred cities and counties, obviously all the federal data, to ensure that there aren't accidental violations of pay-to-play policies by employees. We're also now starting to prototype outside business monitoring, so the same sort of thing, conflicts of interest, and starting to work with a few folks of that, and moving into sort of broader risk monitoring in the longer term. Alongside that, a lot of our customers, rather than doing sort of ongoing monitoring, use the platform to conduct sort of really broad-based due diligence or kind of risk assessment. So, they work with a pretty wide range of customers as well, from media to public affairs groups, groups like Everytown, NextGen, that sort of thing. In the 2020 cycle, we worked with almost every Democratic primary presidential campaign. And in 2016, actually, our first customer was the Clinton campaign. So that's kind of the deck that walks through all that. And now I can show folks a bit of how the products work. So I'll walk through the monitoring product first, and then I'll walk through the search product. So Can folks still see my screen and see the new tab that I've gone into?
Yeah, looks good.
Yeah, so this is a monitoring product. So, this is a solution for folks that are trying to monitor for different kinds of public data records on individuals that are associated with their firm. This specific sort of layout of it is around pay-to-play and political contributions, and I'll show you another version that's more about sort of conflicts risk. But here you basically would have your list of monitored entities. So in this case, we'll say like employees. For each given one, you have a bunch of different filtering that you can set up, different tags, ways you can organize the records, and then it's going to have their political contribution history. As new records get detected, they're added into the platform. What I said earlier about sort of chain of provenance and direct verifiability is important to us here. Every record is going to link back directly to the source itself. It's easy to say, okay, we've pulled all these records together in the platform, and then be able to go and actually get back to the original filing. And then we provide a bunch of like workflow around it, so folks can add notes. You can attach statuses to records and kind of organize them that way. We also have recently built a pre-clearance function. So, a lot of for folks in heavily regulated industries, they'll require pre-clearance of these kind of records. So we have a pre-clearance system. You can do that within the platform. But one of the nice workflow things is you're able to actually match up records directly and say, okay, I said I don't have a preset pre-clearance here, but if you did, you'd be able to match and pair the records directly together. Any question? Well, we can wait for questions at the end, actually. For the dashboard, sort of similar thing. This is kind of more of the workflow side of things. So this would be like a stream of new records as they came into the platform. And you can say, okay, this was not approved. This is a false positive. This was pre-cleared. You can add notes to any of the records as mentioned. And like I said, this kind of specific interface is around political contributions, but we have sort of a new data product that is similar, but let me just pull this up really fast. So this is a sort of similar product, but it's really focused more around a broader range of records around business registrations, professional licenses, regulatory penalties, same deal. So kind of very similar in nature to what you just saw there around political contributions, but stretching across a broader range of data. And all of these sort of different, they're essentially variations on the same interface, just configured differently for different users, but all sit on top of the sort of same data ingestion engine in the background that's pulling together data constantly from all of these different public records data sources. Cool. The last thing I'll show you is like our core search product. So this is like where we got started, and again, it sits on top of the same sort of data ingestion engine as everything else. And so here you can run very comprehensive searches for public records across thousands of different sources. We'll run a search for, we'll say, Elon Musk. And what's different here from other data products and kind of what I alluded to before is that while the experience for an analyst or someone using the tool is going to be very similar to like, okay, I'm searching, essentially my database, what's actually happening on the back end is very different. In some cases, depending on the sources, we have kind of maintained a periodic update, like, sort of on a daily or several times daily basis of the data. But in large part, we're actually going out in real time and querying and bringing back that information into one place where you're able to look at it. So, we cover, like I mentioned before, we have pretty broad coverage of campaign finance data. We cover all 50 states, 200 cities and counties, cover courts in a lot of cases. And again, one of the big advantages of this platform is that the records are actually, directly verifiable and go back to the source itself. So here you can click through, and it's going to take you back directly to the docket itself, where Musk was named. And even if, in some cases we can't actually generate a unique link, but in cases like that, there'll always be a verify at source button that would take you back to the search itself, where you'd be able to get that information. We cover all 50 states for lobbying. We cover all 50 states for campaign finance. We have pretty good coverage for courts. It all in all, cover thousands of different data sources, ranging from sort of novel, different regulatory databases, obviously like SEC litigation in this case, different miscellaneous data sources, stuff like 990 filings from the IRS, White House visitors logs while they were publicized, different data sources like for different foundation donors. We pull together all the different bundlers for political campaigns. So pretty broad data coverage in terms of sort of depth of coverage. And then again, kind of similar to the other kind of product I mentioned, you can turn on any search as an alert and get the same sort of monitoring functionality on an ongoing basis. So if you're, looking at different individuals or different companies and want to know, hey, anytime there's a new record, I want to know about it. You can run that search, kind of go through the information and then have it be sent to you. We also cover business registrations, obviously. So same kind of deal, real-time queries across every state. So that's kind of that's the bulk of it. Kind of different interfaces for using the same set of data in different ways for approaching it. But what we aim to do is take, a whole lot of public records data that's really valuable and important for, understanding risk or sort of driving accountability when it comes to institutions, and make that really accessible and usable for folks. So happy to answer any questions that the group might have, or talk more about why we're doing, how we're doing what we do.
Yeah, thank you. That's very cool. So all your data come from public sources, from the web. So you don't go through any kind of third-party intermediaries or Pacer or that sort of thing. You scrape the web directly.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, we would view Pacer as public records, and we do aggregate data from Pacer. In that it's a public data source. And really when we say public records, what we mean by that is, primary source filings rather than, documents that have been created or generated by, secondary or third parties. The system is really modular, so you can always plug in new sources. So we'll have customers that have other data sources that they might want to build into these queries and have access to. And so we can always integrate those as well. We do have access to a pretty wide range of what I'd call proprietary, secondary or third party APIs that folks can license as part of this. But, our primary function and our principal interest is in taking, the sort of baseline filings, what we view as sort of like these baseline, like baseline sort of truth records of our society, and making that really accessible and usable for folks.
And what are your biggest user groups? Is it you said financial institutions, and is it media companies?
Yeah.
Who are the main users?
Our biggest customer base is financial institutions. Probably about 65% of our customers are financial institutions. We work with a lot of folks in politics and public affairs, like I mentioned before. A large part of that's just that's really like where we started as our initial customer base. We work with some media organizations, not a ton. It tends to just be a matter of budget. There, we'd obviously love to work with more. We think the work they do is really important.
Got it. So Yongsin is asking about your coverage of state courts. Do you cover any county courts? Do you get all the docket entries and metadata? And how many years do you go back?
Yeah, so on yours, again, it's like a live query, right? So it's like really real time. It depends on the sources themselves in large part there. With some of our sources that are periodic sources, we're maintaining a copy, and so in some cases we have a lot of information that goes back further than is publicly available anymore. That's especially true for like campaign finance data and lobbying data. like the House recently changed their lobbying registration. So the files that are publicly available are only for like the last few years. Ours go back much further than what's publicly available. But for courts, most of them are live queries. So they're only party searches. So we don't have like a query of document information, and we aren't aiming to, scrape the full database of the court or something like that.
Mm-hmm. And how do people pay for your service? Is it a subscription service, or do people pay by query, or?
No, we don't do usage-based pricing, so it's annual licenses that our customers sign up for. And customers range in size. Like we work with like single-person consulting firms up to some of the biggest banks in the world.
Got it. Okay, cool. All right. Any other questions, folks? You can either unmute yourself or use the chat function.
No questions?
Who would you see as your competitors in this space? You see, I feel like some of the big information companies, they have services around public records, but how are they different from you?
Yeah, it depends on like what the product is or what the use case is really in terms of competitors. Obviously, we have like very specific competitors in like very specific verticals. I think companies like Nexus and Thomson that do have like public data products and like research products in that space are often like pretty analogous to us, and we'll run into them in in contracts and in deals for sure. But again, like our structure is really different than how those systems work. I mean, a lot of those systems are and they've been built over years. A lot of them were sort of in an interesting kind of trip down trivia lane, or like built by the same guy who built a series of companies in that space and then sold them off to each of the credit agencies. But they're essentially like big data lakes, and you run a query and you like get your information from that. But there's some trade-offs there, particularly around sort of like the rigidity of their structure and how much they're able to configure it to meet different use cases or meet different needs. The other challenge, of course, is like the timeliness of data and the transparency around what you're getting. So with our system, you can see, okay, here's all the different searches that were done. Here's all the different sources that you were looking at there. You can see every source that's being queried. So you have really a good amount of clarity around, like, for instance, like what courts were searched and what courts weren't searched. That's really hard information to get out of any of those systems. The other thing is that it's, obviously much more real time. Like this is information that's highly current. As somebody, that was a Nexus user and has, been for a long time, like one of my frustrations was that it was hard to know, how current any of the information that I was looking at was. And then I think the last thing there is sort of the direct verifiability and chain of provenance. So being able to understand exactly where records come from and how they came about, as opposed to like running a search, finding a record, being like, oh, I found this like very interesting data figment, and now I'm going to spend the next week trying to figure out like where on earth it came from. With all of our data, it's very clear where it comes back. So it functions very differently than those sort of systems do.
Understood. Phil is asking you to talk a little bit about the technology stack and hosting.
Yeah, I mean, we're all cloud, so we're hosted on GCP principally, although sort of multi-cloud elements on AWS and Azure. And yeah, I don't know like what anything specific you wants to know. It's mostly built in Python, although we use a number of other technologies as well. Really heavy users of Elasticsearch. So if if you're into Elastic, Python, data access, data scraping, come talk to us.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much. Okay, if there are no other questions, then I think we'll turn it over to Roman here. But this is very cool. And tell me, how long have you been at it? When did you start the company?
Yeah, we got started the very end of. We incorporated the very end of 2015. Me and a friend had probably been working on it for a few months before that. And then things picked up pretty fast because we signed on the Clinton campaign as a customer right away, pretty much. in 2016, and that was mostly what we did. Obviously, that didn't quite pan out from a business development standpoint and other standpoints as well. So we've been working on it for about a little over 4 years now, kind of full time as a thing. And it's come pretty far in that time, so it's pretty cool to see what's been able to build, and also I think more importantly just kind of the impact that it's had. We work with a lot of customers that do sort of really important high stakes things, and to have them trusting our system and trusting our platform to make those kind of decisions is pretty cool.
Mm. So so Scott's asking if you're planning to use TensorFlow in your system in any way. Any kind of uses for?
Yeah, I mean, so we do we use machine learning in two ways, right? One is in terms of kind of how we clean up and understand data sort of in transit, and making sure that all data is kind of everything's in the right place that it should be, and everything's sort of very clean and good. And then the other thing is in terms of doing entity resolution around records that are brought back by the platform, and sort of doing that in real time or near as part of the query. So that's obviously one of the challenging things in this, is how do you solve the John Smith problem? And so depending on our product, we either this search product that I'm showing here actually doesn't do any entity resolution. It has a pretty robust set of filters, but it's sort of purely record based. Whereas this product here, is basically based around entity resolution and sort of tying the right records together.
And using machine learning for entity resolution.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
so,
cool.
Awesome. So yeah, I'd say right now, the level of things that we're doing there is not really deep learning or anything, sort of at that level. But I think we're doing some interesting stuff there.
Awesome. Well, great. So Mike, could you please put your contact information into the chat so if people have additional questions?
Yeah, absolutely. And if there's anybody who is interested in learning more, or thinks that works in an area where they think our products could add value, happy to work with them. The one other sort of plug I'd say is all of this is built on top of a pretty robust data ingestion infrastructure, and so we do license data to a number of other products that are sort of built on top of our underlying data infrastructure as well. So if there's folks that are trying to build products off public data but don't want to be the ones that are managing their data ingestion, happy to talk to you about that as well.
Oh, so you license out your data also?
Yeah, we license off data feeds
cool.
to sort of an array of different products that sort of build our data into their product, either as part of sort of prediction algorithms and stuff like that, or security scores. It varies.
Neat. Great. Well, thank you so much, Mike. Thanks for telling us about your great work, and thanks for your update. And yeah, I'll turn it over to Roman then. Thanks again, Mike, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I'll give you a virtual applause, and yeah, please keep us posted. And okay? So I can see Roman. I can see his name. I can't see his face yet. Are you there, Roman?
I'm here. Can you see me?
There you are. Okay.
Actually, I can see. Oh, there I am. Cool. Hey,
where are you?
Thanks for unmuting me and unvideoing me. So,
where are you joining us from?
So I'm also from New York. I'm sitting in Queens, New York.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining us. So your business is in the immigration space,
Yep.
and focused on labor certification. Is that correct?
Close.
Close. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll turn it over to you. So I'm curious to learn about what you guys are working on.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess I can before I share my screen, I'll give a little bit of background about myself. So I'm a former immigration attorney myself, and practiced for a bit in the high volume H-1B visa space, which maybe some of you folks have heard of, and kind of saw a need that I thought existed in the market and that nobody was really tackling from a technology perspective. And I'll kind of get into the details in a couple of minutes, but basically wanted to give that background. As sort of the gist was that I had a need that I had, and I ended up sort of leading the practice and building something that I always kind of wanted for myself and wished that I had at the time I was practicing. So really filling a gap in the market that sort of would have affected me coming at it from a kind of first person perspective. So I'll just go ahead and share my screen. I think what I'll do is similar to Mike, I will go through a quick deck, not the whole thing, but just a few slides, and then give a short demo and open it up to questions. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. All right. So can everyone see my screen okay? Or whoever Roland?
Yeah, it looks good,
Great.
yeah.
Yeah, so you mentioned labor certification. So just to give a little bit of context, the H-1B visa is the non-immigrant visa for basically folks who are college educated at a minimum and are coming to the US to work for an employer in what they call a specialty occupation. So a lot of the H-1B visas are taken by tech workers, and you might hear about it a lot in the news. You know, immigration is kind of this legal genre that's also very political, and so you know you hear a lot about immigration from the news, even if it's not in a legal context. So folks come in on an H-1B visa, and part of getting an H-1B visa is the employer essentially running a kind of a labor market test in a way. It's not quite a test. It's really just saying to the Department of Labor, hey, we're going to hire this person who has, you know, these credentials. They're going to be a software engineer or whatever other job title they have within a certain geographic location. And the Department of Labor actually has sort of labor standards, which are salary based for kind of each geographic location for different professions. So you basically, as an employer and through your immigration lawyer, have to show that if you're hiring someone who is, let's say, going to be a software engineer in San Francisco, they are going to make a certain minimum wage that meets or exceeds what the Department of Labor, which basically what the federal government says is like the bare minimum that a person has to make in that locale. So part of this H-1B visa process, a little bit in the weeds, but when you're creating this whole H-1B visa petition, right, you have to put these forms together and fill them out and like have this kind of evidence and then send it out to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is Department of Homeland Security. But while you're doing that, part of this H-1B visa application process is going to the Department of Labor, right, separate federal department, and doing this whole thing where you're like, hey, here's how much I'm gonna be paying this person, here's where they're gonna work, and here's their job title. That's called a labor condition application, this form. And part of the labor condition application process is also, it's not just telling the Department of Labor how much you're paying this person, et cetera. It's also taking that form and notifying the workers in your company or wherever office that person is going to be working at, that you're intending to hire someone, you're going to pay them a certain amount of money, et cetera. So it's basically a notice requirement, right? The idea is like, look, you're going to hire a foreign national, totally fine. You have to provide notice to affected employees. So basically, if you're hiring a software developer, you have to notify the tech workers in your company, right? Because that's somebody who's going to be taking a job sort of in their area of specialization. So that very, very niche thing is what my product focuses on. How do companies provide notice to the workers that are going to be quote unquote affected by that company hiring a foreign national? I hope that clarifies it. Obviously, at the end, please ask me all the questions you want. So Laborless is essentially a way to automate that notice piece. So let me go ahead and, so, you know, I'm not going to read through this whole thing, but the idea is that the compliance process right now is super manual. And the way that companies provide this notice is essentially they take this form that they submit to the Department of Labor that I said outlines where the person's going to work, how much money they're making, et cetera. They take that form and they essentially print it out and they go to their pantry or wherever folks tend to congregate in the office, and they like post it there. If any of you work at a large company, or anybody, any company that hires foreign nationals, you may have come across something like this. Maybe you didn't notice it if you kind of didn't know what you were looking at, but maybe you did notice it and checked it out. Essentially, the idea is that it's providing notice to people in the company that you're hiring somebody. So again, this is super manual today. Large majority of companies, even companies that hire hundreds of H-1B workers a year, print this thing out. If they have multiple offices, they have like a central HR person that calls or emails their other offices where this person's going to work and say, hey, make sure to print this thing out and post it. There's a requirement to post it for 10 days, 10 calendar days. There's some kind of argument in the legal community as to whether it's calendar days or business days, because the regulations say just 10 days. Obviously, where there's lack of clarity, that's where like the lawyers get to nerd out and talk about what's what. But at a minimum, it's 10 days that this thing has to be posted, and then it's taken down, right? So sufficient number of posting days, and then it's put into what's called a public access file, or PAF, as you see on the screen, which is a folder of that document and a couple other corporate docs that stay there for a certain period of time, so that if the Department of Labor wants to audit a company and say, hey, we want to make sure that you're providing notice to people and that your documents are all in place and like you're paying people what you promised to be paying, et cetera, they'd come in and do an audit. And a lot of times, as part of those audits, they look through these folders. So this whole thing is very paper-based right now. I think I actually haven't looked for last fiscal year, but I believe in fiscal year 2018, it was like, I'm gonna butcher this number, but it was like 700,000+ of these LCAs were filed. These labor condition applications were filed, which means that 750,000 times they were printed out and posted in a pantry, and these documents, these folders are created. Now that's not exactly true, because while that number was filed, there are some companies that have sort of built out their own internal systems, but those tend to be very large tech companies, and so for the most part, everyone is handling this compliance process pretty manually. So that's kind of the problem today, right? It's super manual. Now, part of the reason was that the regulations were actually promulgated in 1999, I believe, 2000, just kind of on the cusp of the turn of the century, Y2K, and so they had a provision there for electronic posting. But I mean, if any of you remember, in 2000, like, computers were not as widespread as they are today. Certainly, the internet wasn't, and so there was like electronic mail. There was an intranet and kind of internal. If you read it, you kind of can tell that the tech words that were being used in a regulation that's from the year 2000 is pretty outdated. In 2017, so sorry, to take a step back, the immigration industry and sort of companies have been pushing the government, like, update this, update this, update this. You need some clarity as to whether or not we can do it digitally. So in 2017, the Department of Labor said, okay, cool, electronic public access files are okay, meaning you don't have to have these folders in stored as hard copy manila folders, which you can imagine if you have thousands of employees and you have to hold on to them for, let's say, 3 to 4 years, you just have rooms of documents that don't need to be there. And then in 2019, the Department of Labor also kind of published a memo essentially that clarified that posting these notices, right? So before you put them in the folder, you have to print them out, post them in that office where the foreign national is going to be working. The Department of Labor finally gave some clarification as to whether or not doing it electronically is allowed. So to be fair, prior to 2019, some companies were doing it electronically because they had just the sheer volume need, right? So I pulled up one, I'll show it to you in a second. My example is always Infosys, if any of you have ever heard of it. It's a really, really large multinational IT company. They bring in a ton of consultants into the US, and I think they do like 10 to 15,000 H-1B visas a year. So they post a lot of these LCAs. And so imagine if they had to do all of them as hard copy, it would be nightmare, and they would have to hire people just to kind of handle this manual process. So they had been doing it for a few years, and so I think it was really nice for the Department of Labor to clarify that it was allowed. However, the legal community is very slow to change. I imagine I'm preaching to the choir here, who is, we're all sort of legally minded or legal scholars, and we're inclined towards technology, but the vast majority of lawyers and sort of perhaps law firms are very risk averse, and so they're not willing to necessarily just like jump on the next big thing. So even since 2019, it's taken a little bit of time for technology to catch up in the immigration space. COVID has actually kind of sped that up. So because of coronavirus, folks have to work from home, right? Other than non-essential workers. A lot of these tech folks are not essential workers, and these big companies that hire H-1B workers are not essential either. And so they are forced to work from home. And so this notice, remember the idea behind all of this is that when you're hiring a foreign national, you have to notify your workers by printing a form out, putting it in the office. The idea is that somebody has to see that form and somebody has to be in the office to print it. Now that's not possible. So we actually, I mean, this is super recent, and it's been interesting to see sort of how the government and the American Immigration Lawyers Association, which is kind of like the informal immigration bar, have kind of opined and you know, published stuff about this. But not that you have to necessarily read it, but once coronavirus hit, people were freaking out because they were like, we don't know about what do we do with posting. And so AILA essentially went out and said, look, you can continue, you know, they gave some options as to how to do it, but they basically said you really should consider electronic notification. So it kind of has picked up, and over the years it's just gradually been better. Again, with COVID, it's picked up a little bit. So I think right now the immigration space is more willing to change than ever before, and so kind of we've, you know, introducing laborless, right? This is the big bang. So the idea with laborless was that, you know, I kind of saw this problem back in 2014, essentially. Started working on it back then. You know, Roland, to kind of preempt your question of how long and when we started. So the idea kind of started to ruminate around 2014 when I was doing these high volume, and it was like, I did not go to law school to, you know, become a lawyer to like send PDFs to clients and ask them to print it. You know, this is work that a robot should do, or software, right? So I started working on it in around 2015, 2016 as an idea, really aggressively in 2016. 2017, we launched in early 2018. So essentially, and so in 2019, when the DOL came out with this memo, we were like, hallelujah, right? Like, thankfully, the government's finally catching up. And then, of course, in 2020 during COVID, it's picked up quite a bit as well. But the idea is that now, instead of printing this form and posting it on a sort of your bulletin board at work, you know, or wherever you have your OSHA stuff, or you put it somewhere in a pantry, the idea is that companies should be able to have sort of an electronic bulletin that allows them to post these forms and then track them in a way that actually complies with the regulatory requirements. So basically, with Laborless, you upload these forms or whatever posting information you have. You choose the company that you're posting it on behalf of. If you're a lawyer and if you're a law firm, you're posting it on behalf of your clients. You can do that. If you're an employer and you're posting them yourself, you can post that way. It goes and is posted into a public-facing URL that is unique for every employer. So essentially, every employer has their own, you know, automatically created kind of bulletin board, if you will. And then, of course, the system also compiles all the correct documents and creates that folder I talked to you about. So because the government said that has allowed digitization of both of these processes, Laborless has kind of like wrapped them all up in a nice, neat bundle. So, and I do have some more kind of slides here, but what I wanted to do is actually go in and show you the product. So before I do that, I'll show you Infosys. That big IT company, they and a handful of other more kind of volume-driven IT companies and some other companies now more so than before have sort of built their own internal pages. So this is not very sophisticated, but just to give you an idea, right? US labor certifications are posted here. They kind of like cite the regs. And then here, when you click on one of these posts, you can see this is a senior principal. That's the name of the position. Is going into Morris Plains, New Jersey. And if you click on it, it's going to launch a window. And you'll see this document here. So they've got like a cover letter, notice of filing, right? So again, this is that notice piece. The idea is that their employees or whatever employees are again, quote unquote, affected by this person will see this. And for all of you folks who are anyone in immigration who's watching, this document very well. If not, this is what's called an LCA. This is that labor condition application. Great. So they have this, but it's a link, right? It's not very sophisticated. I don't know if they have anything on the back end, but just looking at it, they probably are just uploading a document, turning it into a hyperlink, and minimally complying, but have a very robust platform. So with Laborless, basically you can have what they have and much more without having to build anything. So I'm going to go ahead and log in here. I'll give a very quick overview. So essentially, when you log into Laborless, this is your main dashboard. You can track all the currently posted LCAs that you have. So if you look at this, this would be basically, go back to Infosys, right? These are the LCAs they have posted. Here as a user, you see all the LCAs you have posted. We've got some important data here. The most important piece here is the date that it was posted and how many days it was posted for, because again, there's that 10-day minimum duration. So they have to be posted for a certain amount of time. It's super easy to create a new post. Before I do that, I'll show you as a petitioner. Petitioner is like legalese in immigration space for an employer, because an employer is petitioning the US government to allow them to bring in somebody on an H-1B visa. And just to give you context, the H-1B visa person who gets it is called the beneficiary, right? They're the beneficiary of the visa. Petitioner, again, is applying, and they are the employer. So each petitioner, so you can have multiple petitioners here. If you are a holding company and you have multiple legal entities, you have to post LCAs as separate legal entities, so you can have separate URLs with Laborless. If you're a law firm, an immigration law firm, you can post LCAs on behalf of all of your clients, because again, you don't have to go in the office anymore, right? It could be done virtually. So a lot of employers are going to their law firms and they're like, hey, why am I doing this still? Why can't you do this for me if it's able to be done virtually? And so, those folks, for example, would come to us and say, we'd like to use your product so that we can post LCAs on behalf of our clients. Now, the most important piece, and I'll go to this very creative fake company, Acme Software Solutions. I'm going to click on this public view button, and it's going to bring up a new tab. This is a public facing URL, right? And this is basically the public bulletin board for Acme Software Solutions, showing you their current LCAs that are posted. All right, so I'm not going to go through all this, but you can see this is a number that's actually generated by the government's own software. When you file these things, you can show the location of where the person is going to be working. So you can have multiple work sites. If you have an H-1B worker who's a consultant, for example, and will be going to multiple third-party clients, or maybe you're a big company and you have offices in different cities, you can list all of those places here. And then, of course, you can click on this file button and it will show up. It'll pull up that same exact form that you just saw earlier. So the idea is that whereas building it yourself requires you to build this kind of, page with whatever backend infrastructure they have and upload everything manually, here with Laborless, you get this automatically by creating basically a profile for the employer. They all get their unique URL. This is the URL that they share with their folks to put them on notice as to where these documents are posted. And that's it. Now, so one of the cool things that we have is analytics for a company that is not discretely capturing every piece of data. You can't have analytics unless you back into it by taking your spreadsheet at the end of the year and kind of pulling it in, or just creating, a pivot table, et cetera. Here, we're capturing data in real time as soon as you post. These are kind of the basic kind of analytics tiles. There's obviously much more data in the back end of the system, so we can create more customized stuff. So this just to give you an idea of why this is interesting. A labor condition application, right, to back up, is showing you when you're hiring someone, let's say in an H-1B visa, where are they working, and how much are they going to be making, and when are you filing? So you can basically look to, for example, if you look at by location, okay, all my workers are going to New York. That's a pretty high cost center, right? Whereas if you go to like Georgia, it's probably a little bit cheaper to hire a technology worker there. So perhaps you can look at it from a strategic perspective and say, okay, well, it looks like over the past 12 months, I've hired folks in these locations. Maybe we can go and change our hiring strategy of foreign nationals going forward. You know, other little things that you can see here that's interesting. What's your volume? If your volume is happening within 2 or 3 months, maybe you can figure out a way to staff appropriately at that time, or maybe you can spread it out, etc. I'm not going to go through the posting process, but it's super easy. You basically click on new, you fill out some documentation, you upload that file, and you upload another couple other files. You tag that file, which eventually turns into that folder I mentioned with the expiration date. And once you hit save, it creates one of these posting records, and you just hit that green button to post, and it shows up here on the corresponding public LCA posting site. So I don't want to go too much more into detail because this is sort of a really niche topic for most. I kind of want to end it there and just open it up to some questions. And but of course, if anyone has any additional questions about the product, happy to answer.
Sounds great, Roman. Thank you so much. I'm wondering, like, what's the kind of volume that that you see there for? I mean, what's the nation's need for LCA and LCAs and public access files? If you've got every company in the country that goes through that process.
Mm-hmm. So the LCAs, like I mentioned, are tied to mostly H-1B visas, but there are also a couple other visas that they're tied to. In general, again, the volume, I mean, I don't want to pull it up now, and probably take me a couple minutes to find, but I think the Department of Labor publishes the numbers. If I remember correctly, a couple of years ago, it was like 750,000 of these were filed. And so it is a requirement for every LCA that's filed to the government for that document or a notice of that document to be posted somewhere. Now, again, most of that is happening when somebody's printing the form, posting it in the office. But for now, at least, the market is the entire, you know, hopefully we want all of those people to be doing it electronically. Okay. So yeah.
My next question would have been, if this is your initial product, what are sort of the adjacent products you go after?
Yeah.
And can you, I mean, in a sense, part of the reason for the public access file is for the government to be able to see if you complied with all the rules, right? Mm-hmm. And there should be an incentive on the government to have that in a more centralized place too.
Totally.
Can you recruit the government to almost help you promote your solution to the industry?
I mean, Roland, do you know anybody? No, but seriously. So first of all, I actually demoed this product to the government, to the Department of Labor last year, which was pretty awesome for me. Literally to the person who was promulgating these rules, and they loved it. So that was great, right? I mean, in terms of getting a rubber stamp of approval, I'm sort of working on it, and I'm working with Ayla and just people directly at the Department of Labor. But I mean, you can imagine that getting an approval or any kind of something official with the government is pretty challenging. That said, Senator Chuck Grassley, who now I'm blanking on the state that he's a senator in, he's pretty anti-immigration overall, but he's been like sort of punching against H-1B visas for a while, throughout his career. But he recently proposed, I wrote a blog about this too, he recently proposed amendments to the regulations surrounding LCAs and this whole process, basically saying that the government should build a centralized LCA repository where everybody posts. I think that makes all of the sense in the world. And while I don't agree with a lot of his policies, I do think that would be great. And in that proposal, he actually wrote that the government is, it like leaves open the possibility of working with a third-party vendor to build this thing. So, or whatever. So I don't know what any of that means, and if anything's going to happen. I mean, there are proposals all the time going to the federal government, but just to show you that you're totally not alone in seeing the value of that, and I think that makes a lot more sense too. And if I can, there's a lot of gray area with this whole LCA thing. If anyone here is interested, you can kind of Google Disney H-1B issues. A bunch of years ago, I think in like 2012 or something, Disney posted an LCA, somebody looked through it and they saw that, I forget the fact pattern exactly, but they saw that like some foreign nationals were being hired at a lower wage than they were. Again, they always have to meet the minimum required wage, but they were getting paid some lower wage than the workers who were already there. And then they had layoffs, and then like, I guess they replaced the American workers with foreign workers, and that became a whole big thing. And there were lawsuits and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of companies are pretty wary about publicizing this data. Now, keep in mind, it has to be public. I mean, you could do a FOIA request and get it. Technically, you're able to come into any company that hires H-1Bs and say, I want to see your public access files. And they have to procure the information that you want within a couple of days. So it is public, but, you know, from a business perspective, there's a balance between how much information do you want publicized, even if it's public, but then also being minimally compliant with the law. So I think a centralized infrastructure would be really great from a legal perspective. I think some businesses would be like, let me do it on my own so that I can kind of have it match my risk profile. But, you know, that's not for me to opine on.
Got it. So 2 comments from former immigration lawyers. Julie is asking, fellow former immigration lawyer here, how have you found selling to immigration lawyers? What are the biggest barriers to adoption you've noticed? And Rebecca says, a great question, Julie, from another former immigration lawyer.
Great question, Julie, from another former immigration. Yeah, yeah, totally. So how have you found selling to immigration lawyers? Awful, and I rip my hair out every single day. No, I mean, it's like anything else. You know, I see the need. I think that immigration lawyers would benefit from this. So they would be the users, but they wouldn't be the beneficiaries of this automation, right? The ultimate beneficiary would be the company that gets to automate this process. But I always tell lawyers, if you now are, you know, use labor lists and then turn around to your clients and say, hey, you don't have to do this anymore. I'll do it for you. You can upcharge. I mean, you can just provide it as a value add. We've had some of our clients coming in because they've received big RFPs from large companies that are looking to move immigration counsel, and some of their requirements are to have automated LCAs. And so they're basically like, we're not going to move lawyers unless the new law firm has, you know, this process. So but it's just like, look, there's always going to be people who fight back. And then on the flip side, we've had lawyers that are like, yes, this is amazing. I've been waiting for this forever. Thanks for building it. So it kind of runs the gamut. I think it helps that I'm an immigration attorney myself. So they kind of like, people are put at ease. I'm not just a sales guy like, hey, you want to buy this, right? I can come in and say, I understand you. I've been there. I built this for myself. So I know that there's a need, and the way that I built it, I think really flows nicely with the actual process. But yeah, ultimately you're asking a sales question, and it's just like, you kind of just have to see what works.
So it sounds like your focus is really on going directly to the big companies that are hiring.
So yeah, so it's not necessarily. That's an interesting question. What I found is that the relationship between employers and immigration attorneys vary. So there's some companies. So some companies are so big that they have their own in-house team, and they only outsource like either super rote stuff or very complex litigation. So think about an Amazon or a Microsoft. They have huge in-house immigration teams. I mean, they basically have immigration law firms internally. Right. And then you have small companies that maybe need one person brought in, and they have no immigration expertise. They don't ever care to have immigration expertise, and they rely 100% on their outside counsel. And they're just like, whatever you say, I'm going with. And then you have everything in the middle. So really it kind of depends on the relationship. Where a company handles their own immigration attorney, their own immigration work, that would be the best case scenario for a sale. And then on the flip side, if you have some attorneys that handle a lot more on behalf of their client, in that case, they would be the better client.
Got it. Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Roman. This is very cool. There's a lot of interesting innovation also in the immigration technology space, and it's the first time I've seen anything on that particular process, and it seems like a very useful system for people in that space, and it also seems that immigration lawyers, they typically don't charge by the hours, right? They have like these sort of package deals, and so it seems to make sense to like, to really, streamline different processes and, add services like that to their bundle of offerings for their clients. So
Absolutely.
it makes a lot of sense to me. Very cool. Thank you so much. We have to wrap up here. We're at the end of our time. If you could just type in your contact information, that'd be great if folks have additional questions. Thank you everyone for participating. Thank you to our speakers. This was great. And yeah, thank you for all your great work. Thank you participants for your great questions. And we'll all see you again next Thursday at the same time. All right.
Thank you, Roland. Thank you, everybody.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.